This Laserdisc requires an adapter for older players, and this CD has Laserdisc video encoded to the data band here. I'm the Soundtracker, and I have got some exceptional uses of both Laserdisc and compact disc technology to show you today. Laserdisc had a better foothold in the Japanese market, and a couple of interesting Laserdisc formats came out in Japan that are a little harder, but not entirely impossible to come by in the US. Now, overall, updates to the Laserdisc format aren't exactly a rare sight. I mean, standard 12-inch Laserdiscs like this copy of Speed had upgrades to the audio signals and the formatting of the image, incorporating things like widescreen letterboxed video to preserve the original aspect ratio of the movie, digital audio tracks alongside the analog audio tracks for backwards compatibility with older analog-only players, and my personal favorite, DTS 5.1 or Dolby Digital 5.1 discrete surround sound depending on the disc. That's all considered normal for a 12-inch Laserdisc. I mean, the format ran from 1978 until 2001, so what's offered in terms of soundtracks and picture formatting changes pretty much based on the movie and how old the press of the disc is, but there were also some pretty experimental things happening with the format, particularly from the late 80s and into the mid-90s. The two formats that I have here are Laserdisc Single and Video Single Disc. Starting with Laserdisc Single, this bears a lot of resemblance to Mini Laserdisc, but there are a couple of key differences. They're both 8 inches across, which essentially means they both fit snugly into the middle cutout in the tray, but Mini Laserdisc and Laserdisc Single are different thicknesses. Mini Laserdisc on the right is the thickness of a standard Laserdisc, and Laserdisc Single is about the thickness of a compact disc. I don't actually know if the thicker one is officially known as Mini Laserdisc, but I can't exactly call it an 8-inch Laserdisc, so for the purposes of distinguishing the two, I'm going to refer to the thicker one as Mini Laserdisc, and the very obviously Laserdisc Singles as Laserdisc Single. In any case, Mini Laserdiscs are just that, smaller versions of a standard Laserdisc. They typically have music videos or laser karaoke applications, and are usually single-sided with a white plastic top to let you know, in the most physically tangible way possible, don't try to play this side. There are a few double-sided Mini Laserdiscs, but I don't find these to be quite as common as the single side with a white top version, I mean, at least as far as home video releases go. I've always thought that was a bit of a shame, too, because the practical upshot with a double-sided Mini Laserdisc is video storage. That disc can possibly store up to 40 minutes in total if formatted in CLV. And that would have been great for something like an artist interview if music videos were going to occupy the A-side. Where it's possible to have up to 40 minutes in total on a Mini Laserdisc, that is absolutely not possible with Laserdisc Single. Laserdisc Single is, as the name implies, only a single-sided disc, and despite having a second shiny side, there is nothing recorded on the other side of the disc at all, because that layer is flat-out missing. The video and the audio carrier signal on a Laserdisc is pressed into the plastic similar to the way records are, and the information is extracted by reflection. A laser light shines on the physical peaks and valleys of the signal, and the variations in the signal on the plastic affect how much light is reflected off of the aluminum layer of the disc, and back into the lens, which is the first step in the player reconstructing the audio and the video signal. Since this disc is single-sided, the plastic typically holding the video information on side B just does not exist, so the runtime is a maximum of 20 minutes in the CLV format. Now, I haven't run across any CAV formatted ones yet. If you have, please let me know in the comments. The discs being the thickness of a CD makes them feel quite a bit more fragile because they're so thin. They're kind of awkward to handle because of the size and the weight my hand is expecting for this shape. The sizing was intentional though, both physically and for runtime. Laserdisc Single was supposed to be a more cost-effective way of distributing video on Laserdisc as a format in Japan. Less program material meant less plastic, less cost to produce, and a lower-cost Laserdisc. At least, I presume, less program material, lower-cost Laserdisc. It was really hard to find any kind of information about this format on Google Books, but I do feel that it was pretty heavily implied, given that I found discs like Madonna, which were released as a white-top Mini Laserdisc in the US, and a Laserdisc Single in Japan. What I can say for sure, though, is that the thickness of the disc presented a problem for older players because the spindle and disc stabilizer are designed to accept the thickness of a regular Laserdisc. It's fine for something like Mini Laserdisc because that has this extra layer of plastic on the other side of the disc to help with the size tolerances, so the player can grip and spin the disc at the appropriate speed. That's why Laserdisc Single requires an adapter for older players. This adapter plate allows the disc to become the size required for players that don't yet have the adaptable spindle and clamp for differently sized discs, which I'll get to in a moment. That adapter plate isn't just for these older top-loading players, though. It's also required in a few front-loading players like the CLD 1010. This unit was made before Laserdisc Single had come out, and it is a fantastic early example of Pioneer's innovation, combining compact disc playback with Laserdisc playback in the same unit. That was accomplished with two spindles, one for CDs, which tucks away internally when not in use, and one for Laserdiscs, which remains in position in the center of the player, so the size tolerances matter here as well because Laserdisc Single is too thin for this player, though you wouldn't know that without opening it up. The inner workings of Laserdisc players had a lot of changes over time, and at this particular point in their history, the CLD-1010 had some challenges reconciling the speed and size difference from compact discs to Laserdiscs, and so it has two separate spindles and clamps inside, with one laser going between them. Like I mentioned though, the need for an adapter is much harder to tell from the outside of the player. Without taking the cover off, I would have assumed everything fit onto one spindle because most of my players operate that way. There are a ton of players made after 1987, like the CLD-1070, that have an adaptable spindle and clamp which is capable of holding and playing whatever size and speed of disc that you throw at it, CDs, Laserdiscs, and even Laserdisc singles, so the adapter plate is not always a requirement for US players. Laserdisc Single was mainly a Japanese format though, and in Japan, this transition was made a bit easier with a card that was included with the adapter plate. According to Google Translate, this card shows common Laserdisc players that will require an adapter in Japan, which is great because just like in the US, not all of them do. In any case, if you want to collect these, it's a good idea to do some research about your particular player, and speaking of collecting, there are quite a few options for video material. I mean, have a look at some of these.
監督のジェームズ・キャメロンは再びアーノルド・シュワルツェネッガー、リンダ・ハミルトンと組み待望の続編が完成。ターミネーター2。
He's a criminal's worst nightmare. A cop who enjoys the danger.
No guns, no jujitsu, just bring him down.
Do you really want to jump?
Yeah, the one around the corner.
The one around the lane?
Yeah.
You want to go?
I want to go.
You want to go? There it is. Wait a minute, you going in, Swoop? Yeah, I'm going in.
I'm so glad Japan also uses the NTSC standard for a video signal because I've been able to use more Laserdiscs like this without having to do any signal conversion. But in full honesty, some things like the making of Terminator 2 are nowadays readily available from other sources like the DVD of Terminator 2. Additionally, most of the cooler ones that I've come across are naturally voiced in Japanese, so practically speaking, it's a bit difficult to recommend buying some of these unless you want to have a couple of interesting foreign discs in your collection. You might be able to get some more use out of certain karaoke discs, though. There are quite a few karaoke discs that follow the thinner disc specifications of Laserdisc Single and were manufactured for a US market. Karaoke was popular enough in the United States during the 90s to warrant production of home karaoke Laserdisc players, and since most, if not all, karaoke players were made from the late 80s into the early 90s, they have that adaptable spindle and clamp, so Laserdisc Single karaoke discs, like this one, were easier to produce in the US without having to introduce the idea of an adapter. At least, I couldn't find evidence of one having been produced in the US, aside from this bit on the jacket talking about the possibility of a disc getting scratched without one. Regardless of that though, since you wouldn't typically use a karaoke disc in anything but a karaoke player, there's less of a chance of the disc getting messed up in a player that can't handle its size. While these particular discs are karaoke specific, you don't actually need a karaoke player to watch or listen to the music on them, you just won't be able to use the karaoke functions in a normal player. Just make sure it's a player new enough to have the adaptable spindle and clamp, or look around for the LD Single adapter plate. I mentioned earlier that a single-sided disc can't play video information that it doesn't have on side B, and the only article that I ran across covering this format stated that these discs, by design, are not able to use the both-side play function in a Laserdisc player. I want to put that to the test just to cover all of my bases with this format, and besides, I mean, there's sometimes a little portion in the back of my head that says, I wonder if that's really true for the discs in practice. Alrighty, the disc is playing, so let's try shifting over to side B first. Wow, I am actually surprised that the player is not doing anything. I mean, for some reason I figured that it would have to go through the motions of doing the laser flip to figure out that the other side isn't playable. But I guess Pioneer hard-coded the first side of a Laserdisc Single to not let the player engage the side B auto flip. Just to be fully sure though, let's see how much nothing happens on side B, because I'm still curious if maybe there is even the slightest chance that we're gonna run into a message like Flippy the Turtle. Well, yeah, the player simply refuses to spin that. Most Laserdiscs that are of a standard thickness, if they have no program material on the other side, there is a warning saying so on the disc. But if you attempt to play that side regardless of the warning, it will still show something like Flippy the Turtle to give the watcher a delightful visual cue saying, "Please turn me over." And there was a small part of me that hoped to see a message like that even though I know the second side isn't affixed to the disc physically. And in hindsight, I mean, why would it show anything? Going to the trouble of adding that message would defeat the purpose of a single side-only disc and drive the cost of production back up, so yeah, there you have it. I mean, there are Laserdiscs that are entirely single-sided and the thickness of a CD. But that brings me to my next Japanese disc, a CD that has Laserdisc video encoded to the readable area of the disc. This one is a format called Video Single Disc, and where it was hard finding information about Laserdisc Single, it was near impossible finding information about VSDs because they only seem to exist as footnotes in Google Books. The first time I found out about these, I was looking through a manual for my DVL 919 Laserdisc player, and I was surprised to see a format that I hadn't heard of before until I started looking into where it came from. As I mentioned earlier, Laserdisc overall was far more popular in Japan, so from there I started wondering why the US version of a manual for this Laserdisc player makes mention of a format that, as far as I can tell, was never even sold in the US. I'll probably never have an answer to that, but I'm glad it was in the manual because these are pretty interesting in their own right, and I might not have run across them otherwise. Video Single Disc is simply Laserdisc video encoded to a 5-inch compact disc, which from what I've seen of the ones I've bought is usually a single music video, though sometimes it's a collection of idle commercials. As you might have guessed from the Laserdisc video bit of that sentence, these are only playable in Laserdisc players, even though the information is being stored and delivered on a compact disc. The physical size does limit the capacity for video, though, holding at maximum 5 minutes of footage. But for a pop music video or commercials, that's plenty of time, and honestly would have made these discs cheaper and more accessible for Laserdisc enthusiasts.
人前ではフレンドベーカリーの私ですが、一人だとピピピピピピキティランドしています。
どちらのあなたが本当ですか？
グリコ、フレンドベーカリーとキティランド。
This format is a pretty neat idea in my opinion, and given the small sample of discs that I've collected, there are a ton of music videos out there from Japanese artists in a decent quality. I do think of these as easier to recommend for purchasing as well, because music is easy to gravitate towards even if you don't understand the language. Whereas with quite a few Laserdisc singles, it's a little harder to understand what's going on because the content is a lot more diverse. I can get an idea of what's going on from the images, but it would really help if I understood Japanese. It's also worth noting about these discs that early players are not capable of playing them due to the size, and there is a very small pocket of time where the video single disc format did not exist yet, but compact disc digital audio absolutely did, and that being the case, there are combination players like the CLD 909 that can only play regular Laserdiscs and regular audio CDs, because video single disc did not exist yet. Can you imagine the all-hands-on-deck engineering meeting that must have happened for this format to be added to those players? Fortunately, manufacturers were quick to adapt the new standard, so there are quite a lot of players from the late 80s onward that have the ability to play these kinds of discs. Video single disc compatibility was added to the CD spindle in the CLD 1010, which spins alarmingly fast in this player because the video signal itself requires this rotational speed to be read properly by the laser. Something interesting I noticed when I first bought these, nowhere on the player does it mention video single disc, and no matter what player I load it into, the disc recognizes as a CDV type. Even more interesting, when the video section finishes, the player reacts as though it has just a little bit more to play, moving the laser to the beginning of the disc and very definitely starting a track that lasts a few seconds before deciding it's done. I thought that was a bit of an odd thing to do until I had a closer look at the disc, and I found this little CDV sigil, and that's when it clicked why the player was behaving that way. The CDV mark is tied to another format called CD video, which is what video single disc is based on, and it is impossible to talk about how one works without bringing up the other. CD video is a hybrid 5-inch compact disc that was basically designed to sell upcoming singles. These discs have a couple of tracks worth of the latest music of the time, and sometimes it's different tracks, sometimes it's remixes of the same song, and one track's worth of a music video like we saw with Video Single Disc. That's a pretty neat idea too. The audio tracks on the disc are all playable in any standard compact disc player, so you'd have had access to all of the songs upon purchasing the disc. But take that same disc and put it in a Laserdisc player, and now you have access to the music video as well. There are reasons this format didn't take off. If you'd like to know more, I have 2 other videos showcasing this format specifically, but for the purpose of talking about Video Single Disc, let's take a closer look at the back of a CD video. On the readable side, you can see CD video here has a change in texture, and that shows us where the information is stored. The outer section is the same as Video Single Disc with 5 minutes of frequency-modulated analog Laserdisc video, but the interior section here is where the PCM compact disc digital audio is stored. CD audio and Laserdisc video are very different kinds of information, so the signals themselves are stored segmented away from each other. The practical upshot of that setup, as shown earlier, is CD players can read the CD area without being disturbed by the Laserdisc video signal, but combo Laserdisc players can actually read both the video and the audio sections. When you put a CD video into a compatible Laserdisc player, it takes a moment for the player to sort out what kind of disc is actually inside of it, because it could be one of 3. Laserdisc, a regular CD, or a CD video. And in the case of CD video, the player starts on the video track because that's the whole point, play video in this player. Once the video section is finished, the player moves the laser to the CD area and automatically starts playing the audio tracks on the disc. That right there is the key to Video Single Disc acting so strangely in a Laserdisc player. Video Single Disc is essentially CD video, but with only video on it. The discs are formatted to the same set of standards, so they behave the same way even though Video Single Disc is only meant for Laserdisc players. If a Video Single Disc is put into a CD player, all that shows up is a few blank seconds and a stop code, which pulls double duty in a Laserdisc player to tell the system that it's reached the end of the disc and that it can stop playing now. I can only speculate on why audio might have been dropped from the CD video format to make Video Single Discs, but I've got 2 theories. First, money. It costs more to add music to a disc that can handle 2 formats. I mean, we're talking about licensing fees, we're talking about production costs, and since the point was specifically cheaper video discs, then adding music to the mix would have been unnecessary and a little bit more expensive. Now, second, there was already confusion in the market around Laserdiscs and their capabilities, so in this particular case, offering fewer options on the product makes it a little more straightforward to use. CD video as a format came out in 1987, and while its predecessors, Laserdisc and the compact disc, had been out for a few years by that point, I think people were still getting used to the idea of video and audio discs both read by a laser. I mean, let me put it this way. When you think of movies or music in the year 1987, do these come up, or do these come up? Yeah, exactly. And honestly, throwing into the middle of all of that a CD-sized disc that can now do both audio and video, but only one in a specific player, well, it was just a little bit too far ahead of its time, so CD video didn't really get very far. Now, Video Single Disc, on the other hand, the earliest date that I found for that one was somewhere around 1990, and that date tracks a little bit better for me. Now, by 1990, I think laser-based media had come more into the public consciousness, so it makes sense that a manufacturer would strip down the idea of a CD video to just the video single portion and try to sell that. CD singles already had their own foothold in the market by that point too, and didn't require a special player, only a special slot which was on pretty much every tray-loading player. So while Video Single Disc is technically less product, it fits better in the public consciousness and in the home video library. I mean, I think it was easier for people at the time to have their movies and their music separated out, which, as far as I can tell, still holds true to this day. I mean, I don't know many people who actually use their Laserdisc players as anything other than a video player. So just because it can play CDs doesn't mean everyone was rushing to use it for that, so the idea of a Video Single Disc is reasonable to me. And it seems to have worked out as an idea. I found a ton of these things on Japanese auction sites, so it seems to me that the market in Japan, at least, was very much up for this product. As I mentioned before, though, I had a really hard time finding out any kind of information about Video Single Discs on the web, so if there's anything that I missed here for either Video Single Disc or for Laserdisc Single, please let me know in the comments section because I would love to know more about these formats. Anyway, thank you for watching, and if you like this video, you know what to do.